Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. Live from the COVID Coliseum, my name is Rob Hilferty, and I'm here with my co-hosts, Courtney Staples and Daniel Quinn. On today's episode, we finish up our jaunt into Diploraptor's world of pagodas, spirits, and mecha. Again, this is part 2, so I always recommend you go back and listen to part 1 before you listen to this one, because, boy, you're probably going to be pretty confused. Plus, I don't have to give you the wrap-up, because we do that on the other end. Now, a big thank you again to our patron Diploraptor for submitting this prompt that we're finishing up. And remember that if you want us to build your world, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com. Click the link, follow the instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, we're on Twitter at Let's World Build. You can come join our Discord and chat with us about whatever you want, really. We're always there, or, within a reasonable amount of time. And if you're feeling particularly generous or just want access to our sweet, sweet Patreon goodies, you can go to our Patreon and give us money there. We've got Discord goodies, early episodes, patron-only episodes, which are quite sweet. And something that we've done recently is you get double the prompt length when you are a patron. So if you're interested in any of those things or anything else, then come join our Patreon. Now, with all of the shilling out of the way, let's get back into it. Where the last we left off, we had a twist, which was now family gets involved. So Daniel, why don't you kick us off and tell us how you reconciled the twist with our prompt?
My thought was that we established at the end there were this country or whatever the realm is essentially one realm that's infighting. And so I thought perhaps the ghosts that are prevalent in this half of the realm, maybe there's some kind of family rift going back generations that might be underlying the conflict, or maybe in some way manipulating the political aspect of it. So to say like generations and generations ago, these two halves, maybe they were part of the same family, or it's caused by, I guess, like genealogical infighting.
Mm-hmm. I would love to jump in there because I feel like my prompt is pretty spot on to what you're looking for here. So last episode, we talked about the spirit channelers kind of being put to a lesser and lesser degree of importance. And I thought, gee, wouldn't it be so interesting if one of those spirit channelers was one of the either grandson or great grandson, I suppose, of the emperor? Mm-hmm. So you have a legitimate claim to the throne of the empire in one of these spirit channelers. And all it needs is just a little bit of nudging and a little bit of ambition. And all of a sudden you have a conflict between the quote unquote rightful spirit emperor and this kind of semi-deposed offspring. And I thought that would be a really great way to kind of push that conflict, that inner turmoil, to its boiling point.
Yeah, that's interesting because we didn't really talk about how that would work with this basically immortal, like clockwork spirit emperor. Mm-hmm. Like, how do his offspring or descendants, how do they deal with not being able to get that power?
Well, I was thinking about this in that, the original emperor, the one who sacrificed themselves to create the spirit barrier, they create the barrier, but then the lineage kind of continues on, that there is a natural progression. But when the spirit emperor comes back, that they obviously take precedent, but there's still a lineage. There's still a rightful heir to the throne who is now slighted. Mm-hmm. So I thought that kind of interplay would be really interesting. So you have to kind of temper one's ambition with one's own right to family and stuff like that. I thought that'd be a really fun conflict to play into. And again, with this, it's like, you could argue that both have equal right or claim to the throne.
Yeah, definitely. It gets very messy, which makes it more fun for us.
Absolutely. And this is where faction and like espionage kind of come into play as well, which is more fun for me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
How do we give rise to a civil war? Is the creation of this immortal emperor what breaks the country in half, or was it broken before that?
Well, remember that this is all based on the Meiji Restoration. So the breaking of the spirit barrier is where the de-emphasis of that channeler class starts to come into play. So something has been broken within that, right? And then this added layer of Civil War drama is just like it's increasing the level of conflict in espionage and intrigue within the country. Because remember that they created this spirit barrier to keep stuff from getting out or in rather. And so there's got like, so that part has already been broken. So this is just an increased level of turmoil inside the country.
I thought we had established last time, because what we were trying to figure out is what is that external pressure that created a need for a restoration. I thought we talked about keeping the boundaries of the story to this realm, and that the outer conflict is in fact another half of their own country, like that became opposed.
I still think that's entirely doable here.
That's what I'm wondering, like, is the Civil War happening prior to the Emperor becoming who he is? It's in a response to that, or has it happened after he became who he is?
So the way that I was thinking about it was that there was a civil war in the past, like centuries ago, potentially, when this barrier was created. And then after that threat died down, essentially, then the Spirit Emperor removed the barrier. And I think we had decided that the priests had actually kind of called him back into the palace, the Clockwork Pagoda. And now there's a new civil war arising because of his return.
Right. I think the idea that we have, it's a very different type of war, where this is all very like political and like street fighting, as opposed to open warfare, which is the previous civil war, hence the giant spirit barrier and stuff like that. Which again, I mean, if we're going off of, historical Japan, then that absolutely tracks and like kind of echoes what we're looking for historically there as well.
Right. So then the question I put to you both again is, what's the external, what's the thing that's pushing against them?
I don't think we ever established that, did we?
Or we were talking about like the more nature-based faction that had pushed against them, and in order to protect themselves, this empire, or this part of the empire, cut themselves off.
Yeah, we never really decided on it, because then we talked about a potential civil war to prevent the narrative from expanding, rather than creating a completely new villain. You know what I mean?
Well, how about this? How about we finish up reconciliation with the twist first, and then we can dive into answering that question. Does that sound acceptable?
Yeah.
Yeah, we could try. It may require us to answer that question. That's what I'm getting at.
You're absolutely right. But like, only Courtney is left. So like, let's see what Courtney has to say. And maybe she has a way to kind of help reconcile us with this separate sub-reconciliation that we need to figure out.
Oh, no guarantees. But my way for solving the family gets involved twist was that ancestor worship and ancestor-based magic are important for the priest class that we had established last time. So when channeling the spirits to use in the mecha animals and other magitech, those priests get a sort of bonus when dealing with spirits that they're actually related to.
Oh, fun.
I was also thinking that given that some of these spirits might have really strong feelings about what's happening currently, in that they've been, happy to see their descendants making their family stronger and more important, they probably also aren't super happy about the emperor wanting to reconsolidate that power now, and in doing so, like, take it away from those priest families and clans. So, like, what happens when you have spirits from hundreds of years ago who are refusing stubbornly to leave because they still feel that they have an active role to play?
I always do love a good stubborn spirit. That's really fun. Yeah.
Almost like a haunting.
Yeah, I guess it, yeah.
Yeah,
Could
I
be.
suppose so. All right. I feel like that all kind of works. I think that we can also now look at what we have, right? And we can try to reconcile what we've got and answer Daniel's question, which was, what was the original kind of threat? I like the idea, by the way, that if we're looking at echoes of, the Meiji Restoration, that we can look to that, where the era of the shogunate is the era of like warring states Japan, which is an era which is open warfare, right? And I think that is really appropriate for the kind of things that we're we're focusing on here, right? Like if this era is all about small arms, street warfare, espionage, and stuff like that, then it makes sense to me that we would mimic open warfare and militarism in the previous state, and hence why we create a giant spirit barrier to begin with, right?
Mm-hmm.
So with that being said, right, like if I'm just stealing directly from history, then we just have it so there's a separate claim to the empire, right? And just kind of go from there. And whether it be legitimate or not, it doesn't really matter. And then that's what the open warfare was about.
Yeah, could be that this emperor had a sibling or an uncle or some other relative who felt that they had a strong enough claim to the throne that they all out rebelled.
Yeah, I actually prefer that it's probably like somewhat separate. Like it's not like a brother or something like that. So it's not like a direct civil war. But I think what you said, being like an uncle or, you know, like maybe even just a complete charlatan, you know, who has fake claims to the throne would be interesting as well. And let's talk about this, because this separate force was obviously large enough and powerful enough to threaten a city state or a part of this country that was able to summon giant mecha robot, you know, like animals, right? So we have to imagine that they brought a lot of power to bear, but then obviously waiting them out worked. So I think it'd be kind of interesting to see that it's not like this threat ever went away. It's just that it cannibalized itself, because like they had all this ambition, they had all this strength, but the empire behind the spirit barrier knew, give it a while or give it a long enough time and they will eat themselves due to ambition. Like they're going to have to point their swords inward after a certain point. And then that's how they ended up surviving. It wasn't through overwhelming power. They just had to wait until that power got turned elsewhere. And then that's where they were able to survive and thrive again.
Yeah. And given that we had talked about it being like a nature, almost druidic opponent there last time, and how overgrowth was very important to their tactics. Like they would sort of flood areas with plant matter and such. Like maybe what they essentially did was like drain their own land accidentally of nutrients because they were just constantly producing plant life. And after a while, there just wasn't enough, you know, nitrogen in the soil. There wasn't enough stuff for the plants to thrive on, that it eventually died out.
Not enough long-term planning. Not enough long-term thinking. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So we're saying, just to make sure I understand. So we're saying the past, this was one city-state, some kind of conflict separated them because they were trying to make a claim to the throne of the emperor. And then in order to keep them at bay, they've separated them off. And then because of their failed resource planning and inability to get access to what's beyond that barrier, they basically were weakened enough to not be a threat anymore.
Yeah, essentially.
Okay.
I would also like to emphasize again that, you know, they needed an enemy, and once that enemy was behind a barrier, they essentially betrayed themselves. Like that was certainly part of it as well. Like falling to infighting is always one of my favorite ways to weaken enemies, or to like weaken an empire in general, because that's always like pretty historically accurate as well. You know, it's either like they get too fat, content, and hedonistic for their own good, and they start like not caring about certain very important aspects about governance, or it's like they just start butchering each other because their ambition becomes too much, you know, like that kind of thing.
Yeah. Actually, going off of like the idea of cannibalism and butchering, what if that area is now filled with a lot of carnivorous plant life? Because
fun.
After a while, they kind of realize like, oh shit, we've drained the nutrients out of the soil. We need some other form of energy to draw from. So that's kind of all that's remaining there now.
I love that.
Can we base I like that, absolutely. Can we base the quote unquote resource draining in something spiritual? So, for example, suppose this entire realm depends on, I don't know, harvesting or tapping into spirits in order to perform basic functions like agriculture. And by creating a spirit barrier, you drain that that half of the realm of its spiritual essence, and that's why their lands have started to become untillable, because I think the through line of the spirit stuff needs to be there.
Yeah, definitely. Because we kind of talked about that last time too, how this barrier was erected in part to like keep spirits from giving the other side energy. So I think that totally works. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it all comes together. It all tends to work. And I think what might be kind of interesting is that once the spirit barrier comes down, then like a bloom starts to happen around it once more. You know, like there definitely still are carnivorous plants. And by the way, they don't feed just on like meat, but I like to think that they're probably eating on spirit as well, you know?
Yeah.
Just why not? But like the idea that, you know, there is some level of normalcy returning to the rest of the country, but at the same time, like still dealing with the fallout of, you know, like being cut off spiritually from the rest of the realm. That's also really interesting to me as well. But I think it's time to move into our factions. So I had Daniel start. Courtney, I normally do opposites and have you go, but I'm gonna let everyone in on a little secret. I've been dealing with COVID, and oh boy, I feel like I definitely half-assed this faction. So I'm just gonna get it out there, and then we can move on to the more interesting factions here. So I'm looking at this world, COVID brain. I'm looking at like what we can add. We've already got mecha. We've got samurai inspired classes. What don't we have? Oh boy, we don't have shinobi. So of course we got to add in some ninja. And I'm
that
like,
was
okay,
literally mine as well.
Obviously, yeah, it's the obvious thing to do, Courtney, of course. But what did you do to make your shinobi more interesting, Courtney? Did you have them be Oni worshipping spirit eaters? Because that's what I did with mine. So yeah, the shinobi that I have, they serve the emperor, and they have the ability to devour the spirits of others. And you know, you're like, wait, why would they serve the emperor? Yeah, they have their own agenda. They're definitely looking to eventually usurp the throne. But you know, for now, they're just happy serving the emperor, and specifically finding, hunting, and, you know, eating the spirit channelers on the opposing side. But yeah, faction done and over. Courtney, how are your ninja different than mine?
That was like literally mine. That's amazing. Yeah, I had basically wanted like witch hunter inquisitor types loyal to the emperor and who wanted to like help him regain his power, and those of course ended up with the flavor of like ninja assassins, essentially trying to find and get rid of the emperor's opponents. And I had actually pictured them using magitech devices to be able to get around unnoticed and move in unnatural ways, like cloaking and that sort of thing.
Batman grappling hooks, basically.
Oh, totally. Yeah. And likewise with consuming the spirits, I hadn't pictured them necessarily eating them themselves, but more so storing the spirits of the channelers, the priests, to bring back to the emperor to like feed to him, basically.
So you went Ghostbusters and I went like demon cult, basically.
Yeah, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That, I mean, Daniel, tell us about your cult of shinobi, please.
Well, incidentally,
oh my god,
they weren't intended to be ninjas, perhaps, but I did have Imperial Clockwork Ghost Hunters. So what's I wrote down? The idea being this is the Emperor's elite force of mostly clockwork agents that seek out the channelers to apprehend and divorce them of their souls. So it's the same thing, basically.
I like that we all came up with the same exact thing.
Oh boy, we're really bringing our A game today, y'all.
Yeah.
Okay, well, obviously, we can't just have 3 flavors of the same fucking faction here. So, what do y'all say that we just make a new faction up together?
I was gonna say that too, that we could come up with something new on the spot.
Great.
Okay. Random rolls. Yeah.
Oh, we're definitely doing random rolls. You best believe that we're doing random rolls.
That said, I do like the idea that each of our 3 ninja-ish factions are separate, but they're all sort of infighting to get the Emperor's favor. So they're like slightly different.
Yeah, I like that as well.
Yeah.
Must need.
Yeah. Okay. So the theme for the faction that we're rolling with this time is going to be growth and expansion, or expansion, I should say. And the first thing about them that's interesting or unique that we're going to be focusing on is an artifact. Okay, so this faction, they're based on growth and expansion. They're also focused on an artifact. Now, we have one of three options here that I see. But as of right now, I actually don't want to focus on them being part of the Emperor's retinue, because it's like we literally have three factions that all serve the Emperor as of right now, right? So they can either be their own separate thing, like a third separate faction, or they can be joining the spirit channelers in some way. What is more interesting to you?
I think they should be a separate faction because that would give more dimension to this setting.
As of right now, so I'm cool with that. But I also want to point out as well that because we have three different factions that all serve the Emperor, this Emperor has gone from like a potentially neutral force to someone who has overwhelming power, right? Like just based on the fact that we now have three separate factions that all serve the Emperor and none to the others, that power dynamic suddenly shifts to the point where the Emperor seems like he is a big bad. He might not actually be bad. I think bad is not correct, but he is like the overwhelming force in terms of power within the country, right?
Yeah, he's definitely come back much stronger than the priests had anticipated, I think.
Right. Okay, so we've got a third separate faction. They're based around an artifact, expansion, and or growth. Where do we want to go with that?
Right away, I was picturing like a group that's kind of venturing out from where the barrier was, and maybe a lot of the citizens of the Empire are sort of hesitant to leave because, I mean, what's outside is carnivorous spirit-eating plants and stuff, so not the nicest area to explore, but this group, for whatever reason, maybe they're seeking their own sort of independence. They're kind of heading out. Maybe they have some of the like large spirit animals of their own that they're traveling with that they don't want to see like kind of retaken by the Empire. And that's part of why they're heading out.
I wonder, since we don't want to expand the boundaries of the narrative, expansion in my mind typically means like expanding the realm. But I thought perhaps it means expanding the resource, which would be the spirits. So maybe this artifact taps into a veil or something beyond the realm to get access to more spirits or different genealogies. I don't know.
I see.
Remember that these themes are also supposed to be fairly loose. So even though it says expansion and or growth, it could also mean like growth of one's wallet, expansion of one's wallet. So if we could just strictly have them be merchants of some kind or tradesfolk of some kind. But I think that Daniel, what I'm interested in is kind of focusing on that artifact a little bit, because artifact implies that this thing is ancient, right? Like it might be powerful, but to me, artifacts are always things of the past. And so I think that if we're going to be focusing on the word artifact, then it has to do, I think, with a little bit with clockwork, because the clockwork aspect is something that they've essentially left behind them at this point, correct?
Or well, the Emperor is still clockwork. Though you're right that the mecha animals are kind of being, the clockwork armor and stuff is being taken off of those.
So is this artifact, is it like the last or perhaps one of the last mecha animals? Like they just refuse to take their armor off and they're like, no, I still have a duty to do?
Why was it ever put on again? Because our resolution so far is that the Civil War was to stop usurpers from the throne, and then their lands got tapped as a result of the barrier. So why did they put the armor on the spirits in the first place?
Because they were originally engines of war.
So they were fighting with them prior to the barrier, using the spirit armor.
Right.
Okay.
The spirit barrier, I imagine, was probably something that was like a last ditch effort.
Yeah.
They're like, we're going to lose even though we have all these mecha pagoda animals. It's like,
Okay.
we need something that is going to,
Could it have been a WMD kind of thing that was involved in the creation of the barrier that is no longer used or decommissioned, and they're using
Ooh.
it for a different purpose? Like instead
Yeah.
of opening a barrier, they're opening a door or something, or tapping into the vast unconscious realm of souls or something.
Yeah, that could be cool.
Okay. I rarely do this. I'm going to roll a second theme and force us to reconcile it. How does that sound?
Sure, yeah. Gives us more to work with.
Exactly. All right. The second theme is corruption. So, yeah, that makes sense. So we've got growth and expansion, corruption. That kind of works for what Daniel was saying, where it's like a WMD situation where maybe its original function has essentially corroded down to the point. Now, corruption is often seen as like evil, but in this case, I don't think that's necessarily what we need to do.
Mhm.
It's just like, it is an erosion, a corrosion of its original purpose. And the idea that this thing was a WMD, but now it is something else and gives that kind of world purpose, like, that's interesting to me. And I like that a lot.
We could also work too from like you said, Daniel, the sort of opposite of the barrier. What if that is, like you said, kind of opening up the door to the spirit world and almost flooding those towards the Emperor as like a spirit laser beam, basically.
Yeah, because like it seems like the wall was protective, and
Yeah.
this might be a weapon. They're turning what it was a defensive tool into a weapon.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting.
Or it could be an anti-spirit laser that if they point that at the Emperor, they could potentially just vaporize him completely.
Yeah, maybe it's not about bringing more spirits in. Maybe it's about putting them back, like sending them away permanently, like letting them permanently die.
Yeah. It's like an exorcism machine.
Yes. Because that would be the opposite of opening a door to create a wall. The wall is made of spirits, I assume, right? And it's sucking the spirits out elsewhere in order to create the wall. So maybe this puts them back. Like if you think about what the wall is, what is the wall, right? It's in order to block spirits from coming through. It is some kind of ectoplasmic thing, right? Isn't the wall spirits itself? And
yeah,
if they tap the lands outside the wall to create the wall is those spirits that have been tapped. So maybe this weapon can inverse that. It's in the same way it created it.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, I have to imagine then that the people who are kind of focusing on this are heretics in this religion, because if they're anti-spiritualists, if they're like, they believe in an anti-spiritual universe and this weapon kind of does what they're interested in, like maybe they see or saw the devastation that the spirits have caused for the country, and they're like, well, this is obviously the opposite of what we need to do. It's the pendulum swinging in the opposite direction,
Yeah, I mean, maybe they don't plan on getting rid of spirits everywhere, but they need to get rid of the Emperor and set things back to the way they should have been, like to not be brutalizing spirits for their industrial purposes. Maybe that's part of what it is, but they have to resort to this device to do that.
They see themselves as spiritual liberators.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what it is. They see themselves as like, no, we're giving the spirits the option to do whatever they want. And in reality, they're like essentially decoupling them from the physical plane.
Yeah. Because channelers, I think they request the aid of spirits. Like they're not necessarily enslaving spirits. Or it seems like the Emperor himself being a spirit brought back, like they're using technology to enslave spirits to do their purpose, just like they put armor on the spirits in the past.
Yeah.
And this actually adds a third angle to what we're talking about, where, like the Emperor enslaves spirits through his ability to just be a spirit, and he's learned much in the spirit realm. The channelers ask for cooperation, and this third group is like, nah, fuck that. Let the spirits be spirits, and like let them not interact in the mortal realm at all. Right. So in that case, you have a three-way conflict, and it adds in hooks for that third faction to be interested in what the other factions are doing as well. And like, yes, they're their own separate thing, but it's also they're involved and interested in what's going on in that conflict.
Yeah, and I imagine the spirit barrier itself like sort of changed the dynamic as far as the spirit channelers, how maybe in the past it would be a very like mutual decision to work together, like man and spirit.
Mhm.
Whereas
Oh,
with the
yeah.
barrier erected, all of those spirits can't leave anymore. So
Yeah.
is it really
Yeah.
consensual if like the spirit's just been stuck there for like 100 years and is waiting
Mhm.
around, and some channeler comes along and is like, hey, I can give you an out?
Right.
Is that really like a consensual agreement anymore?
Right. I mean, it's manufactured consent. That's
Right,
exactly
right,
what it is.
right.
Yeah. So these are anarcho-communists,
Yes,
basically.
yeah,
Yeah.
basically.
Okay. But on the spiritual plane.
Mhm.
How do we bring the descendant of the emperor and the person who has the rightful claim to the throne into this, though?
Mm.
Well, they're of the channeler faction. So they've already got their own setup and stuff like that. Can we define the artifact a little bit more? I think that would probably be helpful. Because like we have this idea it's a fucking cannon, right? But like, is it as devastating as all that, or is it something that is perhaps a little bit more subtle?
It's, in my mind, it seems to be some kind of bomb you have to put near where the emperor is. Because if you could just fire it from anywhere, then it seems a little easy.
Yeah.
It might have to be set up in the same way that the wall was set up. Like maybe in the Imperial Palace, you have to connect it to whatever the emperor is connected to and then activate it, just like the wall was created.
Yeah, so they would have to like actually sneak in there and infiltrate the palace itself, which is the emperor itself.
Right. And then remember that we also made it so the emperor is the palace itself, which is
Right.
itself on a giant walking mecha. Remember.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. So I think we've just created fairly simply our main storyline,
Yeah.
which is these spiritual radicals have to team up with the channelers in order to infiltrate and then take it's a classic heist movie. It's a
Mhm.
classic heist scenario where you've got to get to the heart of the emperor, set up the spirit bomb, and then bam, you disintegrate them into fucking nothing.
So how did our twist fit into this again? Because it had to do with families, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the channeler is part of the group that is interested in taking down the emperor. So it's the civil war is now not just about, country versus country. It's about like great grandfather versus great grandson,
So
essentially.
is he aligned then with these spiritual terrorists?
I think that he is willing to do whatever he needs to do in order to preserve his class, which is the spirit channeler. So I think that because now that the emperor has 3 different shinobi clan working for them,
Right.
I think that they look at each other and they're like, we don't agree on everything, but this is the only way we have a shot at gaining
Right.
power. And so they use each other and they're like, all right, we're going to get a super squad together of channelers and like anarchists, and we're going to take down the emperor. And that's the best chance we got. And of course, the extra tension that you get with that is you don't know who's going to flip against one another at any time during the entire heist.
Another thing to toss in there is how my reconciliation of the twist involved the channelers kind of getting a bonus to channeling spirits that they're related to. And so
of course,
saying that, could this descendant of the emperor potentially try to channel the emperor's spirit for his own purposes? Like, is he going to get to the center of this palace and turn around and be like, okay, I control everything now because I can control the emperor? Like, is that his end game?
I mean, maybe he's the one. They have to take this tool in there. Maybe the active channeling is how you activate it, and at that point, he has a choice: send the emperor back, or he can possess the emperor and now be a living holder of him and control the machine.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Interesting.
I mean, the other question I have though about this is, those two are connected familially. What's the position, like the caste relationship, I guess, or whatever, of the terrorists? Are they like people without a genealogy, so they're just like regular commoners, or do they have some royal line? Because I feel like it seems to be that Twist is kind of pushing us to make this a family situation.
Yeah, I'm picturing it as like they are descended, or like their origins were in something related to like spirit channeling back in the original palace centuries ago, and over time, like they saw the channeling sort of bastardized and warped, and that made them furious at what it had become. So this is like the end result.
So they're ancient ancestors.
Yeah, so like they could be related to that original class as well.
Got it.
Yeah. That works. That absolutely works. All right. So I suppose the question now becomes, how do we what's the extra twisty bit in the main storyline?
I mean, would it involve like kind of getting one of the ninja groups on their side or infiltrating them in some way?
To get into the palace.
Yeah.
So that way we'd have a third. That's interesting as well, because then you'd have a third faction for even more betrayal and even more potential for, like switching sides, which is always, once you add in that third person to the Mexican standoff, that's where it becomes really interesting. Alternatively, of course, if we wanted to really focus on the twist of now get family involved, we can have it so each subfaction has a relation involved. So it's all in the same family, so like maybe the rightful heir is part of the channelers, but maybe they have siblings who are part of the other clans that are all trying to stop the emperor, and they all have their own motivations as well.
That's what I was like trying to hint at. It's like they should all be connected by their family relations.
I heard you and I wanted to play into that, Daniel. So yeah. Well, then who are these other people? Let's go there, I guess.
It seems like the spiritual terrorists are some sort of distant ancestor connection. So like these are like great grandparents, it seems.
As an uncle myself, I would like to put in an aunt or uncle as that particular anarchists, type of.
So actually, great aunts, great uncles.
I'm going aunt because in my mind, this aunt has like an eye patch, has like an open robe, and is like constantly smoking, like through one of those like long cigarette filter things, like or like through a pipe. Through a pipe. So yeah, I want badass battle anarchist auntie as that representation.
It would also seem, it would have to put them on one side of the fence too. Like it seems like they might have been on the outside of the wall. That's why they're so bedraggled looking.
Oh, I see. Like they had somehow gotten out at some point and were trying. Wait. Maybe they've been trying to break down the barrier the whole time even.
Okay.
They were in the impoverished side of the wall.
Okay, hold on. So they're related. They were stuck on the other side of the wall. They weren't supposed to be on this side, but they, through heroism, through like, okay, we've got to hold this bridge to make sure that the emperor can get the barrier up. And then that happens and they survive, but they're also now essentially exiled from their own land for a while.
There's this like major betrayal that they were locked out, like while trying to protect the emperor.
I like to think that the first couple of generations don't see it as a betrayal, but the newer generations are like, wait, that's fucked. Like you essentially asked our family to die.
Yeah, like over time the story has become warped, and yeah, I like that.
Well, you have to remember too that like the division with the wall, these are not two peoples being divided. These are two people being created. So it's like, like you're cutting families in half by generating this wall. So it would make sense. Yeah, that some of them are on like this aunt and this faction used to be part of the one whole, but for generations they've been separated.
And that's where the artifact came from. The emperor gave this family, who the emperor knew this family to be the most honorable and loyal to the emperor, gave them this weapon to be like, look, I can only trust this to you. And then, generations later, they're like, wait, we have this thing and we can destroy the emperor? Bet we're destroying the fuck out of that spirit emperor. Let's go.
I mean, he didn't intend it to be a weapon, right? It was originally a tool to create the wall.
Partially, I imagine, yeah. Although it could have been a weapon. It could have been a weapon, like the only weapon that could have prevented the emperor from stopping the spirit wall. And they just gave it to a retainer that was remarkably loyal and they knew wouldn't do it, right?
Well, but it was used originally to create the wall. Like it wasn't meant to be a weapon, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, because we had talked about like reversing its use or corrupting its use.
I was just suggesting that they don't necessarily have to be coupled in that way if we have the familial aspect set up. It could just be like a very powerful artifact that they know is powerful enough to stop the wall from being put up or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I'm cool with that too. It's whatever.
I just like it because it doesn't create another MacGuffin. Like we just have the one.
Oh yeah, like what if maybe this is like kind of like the last surviving pylon of the wall,
Oh, that's cool.
That they so like there are others, but they're defunct or in disrepair or whatever. But this one is actually functioning still.
All right. That adds a level of complexity and depth that I'm here for. Let's go ahead and talk about the shinobi. Why is there a familial connection in this shinobi clan? And whose shinobi clan makes most sense?
Oh, what if like spirits of the Emperor's original guard are the ones inhabiting the Daniel's clockwork guard?
That makes sense. Was there his like closest guardian?
Yeah.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I was coughing my lungs out.
That's okay. So Daniel had brought up the idea, his faction was like clockwork Imperial Guard, basically. So I was saying, like, what if the spirits of the Emperor's original guard were the ones inhabiting these clockwork as well?
That were in so why are they teaming up to take down the Emperor then?
I don't think that they are. I think that maybe there's one person among all of these factions that might do it.
Oh, okay. So that particular person is just like, well, why did they? What about them became disillusioned with the Imperial Guard then?
I don't know. Like, I don't know if we have to have one from every, because we have 3, right?
Right. Clans. That's why I'm saying that we need one from the faction that's defecting against the Emperor.
Yeah, I don't think. So what I'm saying is, I don't think the Clockwork clan there's any chance of getting a defector because they're barely sentient.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I was thinking too.
Okay, so we've either got hungry demon ghosts or we've got Courtneys who are Ghostbusters.
Yeah, I think either one works, but what I'm thinking now is that there's like a descendant of the original Civil War opposition in one of our factions. And that's why they want to turn on the Emperor, because they feel that they still have the rights to that power that their ancestor was fighting for centuries ago.
I'll take that into my demon worshipping shinobi because I feel like I want to crank up the edge on that, and I think that totally works.
Excellent.
So that obviously leaves your clan, the Ghostbuster clan, to kind of be the one who are aligning with the Emperor, correct? Or do we want to be the edgy Shadow clan who are taking down the Emperor?
No, I think that works for mine.
Okay, cool. So did we do it? Is that it?
Yeah, I think that makes sense now. Like, I think if we were to summarize it, we can get from point A to point B, and it's coherent.
I think though to bring in something from the 1999 Brendan Fraser masterpiece, The Mummy, is at the end when the protagonists kind of use the Book of the Dead to like turn the Imperial Guard to their side. We could have something similar here where maybe towards the end of whatever battle this is, the protagonists in our world have the option to like turn the Clockwork Guard against the Emperor.
And that's where the spirit channeler comes in, because they're like they're going to recognize the blood of the Emperor and they're going to be like, oh, we'll respect that. Yeah, that works for me. Cool. Now go run it. Everyone who's listening, go run this adventure, because that sounds dope as hell. Okay. This has been a remarkably like narrowly focused episode, and I fucking love that. So I guess my last question before we head on out, do we have any other questions that we want to ask about this setting?
I'm curious what happens to the like giant city-sized mecha animal once the Emperor is defeated, if he gets defeated.
Oh, I have to imagine that the Emperor does in fact get defeated, right?
In some way.
In some way, yeah. Or like maybe just diminished, not necessarily defeated. And remember as well that the way that we kind of approached it is that no one has seen the Emperor. So part of me is kind of intrigued in this idea that no one, not even the factions that are like going against the Emperor, know that he is in fact fully Clockwork at this point. I want to keep that inner circle really tight and really small.
That's interesting. Yeah, I like that.
All right. Well, do we want to answer that question about what happens to the Clockwork mecha? Like, obviously it stops moving.
Yeah, though, if it's one of those giant spirit animals, then that would be underneath the Clockwork armor.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Unless it is like a pure Clockwork mecha, like the only one.
Oh, that's kind of interesting as well.
Guess we could leave that up to whoever's running the game if they want to have a reveal at the end where it's some like enormous spirit god that gets released, or
yeah, I think you've got the right idea, Courtney. I think that we let there be some mystery to it. And I think that we let this setting wrap up here, honestly. So that'll do it for this episode of World Build with us. A huge thank you again to Diploraptor for this particular setting. I had some fun talking about mecha, even though strangely enough, I feel like the mecha kind of ended up being like on the less important aspect of the setting. Like we had it be more about like the family and the people and stuff like that, which I think is kind of interesting. But yeah, I mean, that's going to do it. So remember that if you want us to build your world like we did with Diploraptors here, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, click the link, follow the instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to come and follow us on social media, you can go to our Twitter Let's World Build. If you want to come join our Discord and chat with us directly, you can always do that by clicking the link in this description. And of course, if you're feeling particularly generous, you can always go to our Patreon with a link for that in the description as well. Click the link and then, give us money. You get all sorts of goodies, all sorts of good stuff, early episodes, exclusive episodes, extra stuff like that. Just go look at it if you feel like it. No pressure. But that's going to do it for this episode of World Build with us. Remember that we love you very much, and we're going to get through this together. Until next week.